Hi there. Welcome back to Haunting Vales. The waves crash softly against the hull as the ship sails toward its final destination, Marseille. The passengers smile, the champagne flows, but beneath the glittering sea breeze lingers a secret no one dares to speak. The last voyage to Marseille begins not with a storm, but with silence, the kind that comes before tragedy. When mysterious death shatters the calm of the journey, Hercule Poirot finds himself surrounded by whispers, deceit, and fear. Every cabin hides a motive, every glance a story untold. And as the ship cuts through fog and fate alike, Poirot must unmask the killer before the voyage reaches its deadly end. Stay aboard till the very last moment, for in this mystery, the ocean keeps its secrets well. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Haunting Vales, where every journey ends in truth. Chapter 1. The Voyage Begins. The sea was calm that morning, too calm perhaps, the kind of calm that makes even the most seasoned traveler uneasy, as if the ocean itself is holding its breath. The SS Belvoir, a luxury cruise liner bound for Marseille, gleamed under a sun that looked almost painted. Its decks shone with promise and polished brass, its white hull catching every glimmer of light. The air smelled of salt, money, and mystery. And aboard that ship, standing near the rail in his perfectly pressed suit, was Hercule Poirot. He gazed out at the endless blue, his mind already ticking like the hands of clock. Around him, laughter floated across the deck. Elegant men and women carried cocktails, secrets, and stories they would rather keep buried. Poirot was not here for leisure. He had accepted an invitation from Mr. Lionel Graves, a British shipping magnate who claimed that his life was in danger. The man had sent a letter, desperate, trembling, and precise. "Meet me aboard the Belvoir. I have only until we reach Marseille." Now, as the ship's horn signaled departure, Graves was nowhere to be seen. The first hours at sea were peaceful. Too peaceful. Poirot always distrusted stillness. It often came before the storm. He took his breakfast in the grand dining hall, where chandeliers swayed gently with the motion of the waves. Around him, passengers spoke in polite murmurs. At the next table sat Mrs. Celia Drummond, an aging widow draped in pearls, her eyes sharp behind a veil of charm. Across from her, Colonel Hartwell, a man who wore his medals even when no one asked. And near the far corner, sketching quietly in a leather notebook, sat Mr. Oliver Trent, a travel writer who seemed far too observant for a man of leisure. Poirot's gaze returned again and again to one empty chair, reserved for Mr. Graves. By noon, whispers had begun to spread. "He never boarded," said one steward. "The car that brought him here was empty when the luggage was checked." "Perhaps he changed his mind," said another. But Poirot knew better. Men who fear for their lives do not change their minds at the last moment. Something had happened before the ship ever left the dock. Later that afternoon, Poirot found himself approached by a familiar face, the ship's captain, Charles Whitmore, a man of discipline and pride, his white uniform almost blinding in the sun. "Monsieur Poirot," he greeted, lowering his voice. "I was told you'd be aboard. We've received word from the port authorities. Mr. Graves never checked in, but his luggage did. 3 trunks, 1 briefcase, and a small locked chest." Poirot adjusted his tie. "Locked, you say?" "Yes, sir. Our porter tried to open it for inspection, but it's sealed. Mr. Graves sent instructions that it should not be touched until arrival." Poirot smiled faintly. "And yet, Captain, the man himself is not aboard. How curious that his possessions made the voyage, but not their owner." Whitmore's jaw tightened. "Should we search the ship?" Poirot's eyes drifted to the sea. "No. If the man never boarded, the mystery began before we set sail. But perhaps the solution may yet be found here, floating quietly among us." That evening, the ship glowed like a palace upon the waves. The passengers dressed in their finest. Music drifted from the ballroom, soft violins and murmured laughter. Poirot, ever watchful, preferred the deck. There was something unsettling in the air. The moon hung low, turning the water silver. The sound of waves against the hull was rhythmic, almost hypnotic. He was joined by Mr. Oliver Trent, the writer. "Beautiful night," Trent said, sketchbook in hand. "You're the detective, aren't you?" "Hercule Poirot. I've read about your cases." Poirot gave a polite nod. "And you, monsieur, observe as you write, or write as you observe?" Trent smiled. "A bit of both. People tell you everything if you let silence do the work." Poirot's gaze followed his. "Indeed, silence often reveals what speech conceals." They stood quietly for a while, listening to the sea. Then Trent said softly, "I overheard something strange earlier. The steward delivering trunks to the lower deck said one of them rattled, like glass, and it smelled faintly of smoke." Poirot turned. "Smoke?" Trent nodded. "Like burnt paper." Poirot's mind sharpened instantly. He excused himself and made his way below deck. In the storage hold, the air was cold, filled with the hum of machinery. Rows of luggage rested neatly in their compartments. Poirot found the 3 trunks marked LG in bold gold letters. He bent close. The scent was unmistakable. Ash, smoke, and something else fear. He tapped the side gently. "Hollow." Poirot looked around. No one. Only the echo of the ship's slow heartbeat. He pressed his ear to the trunk. Nothing. Then just faintly, something like a creak from inside. He straightened, eyes narrowing. "You are hiding something, Monsieur Graves," he whispered. Moments later, the door to the hold creaked open behind him. The light from the corridor spilled in, catching the edge of a uniform. It was a crewman. "You're not supposed to be here, sir," the man said, his tone respectful but uneasy. Poirot smiled lightly. "Neither, perhaps, is what lies within this trunk." The crewman hesitated. Then, almost too quickly, he said, "I'll fetch the captain." Poirot watched him go. His steps were too fast, too eager to leave. He followed him back to the upper deck, but when he arrived, the man was gone. That night, a storm began to stir. The calm sea finally broke. Lightning flashed across the horizon, slicing the sky in two. Passengers retreated indoors, but Poirot remained in the observation lounge, sipping tea and studying reflections in the glass. Behind him, laughter continued, a forced, nervous kind of laughter. Celia Drummond sat nearby, fanning herself with a silk handkerchief. "Ghastly weather," she murmured. "I told the captain this voyage was cursed." Poirot smiled gently. "Do you believe in curses, madam?" "I believe," she said, eyes dark, "that certain men invite them. Lionel Graves was one. He ruined lives, detective. You might call that a curse earned." Poirot leaned forward. "You knew him. We all did. He was charming when it suited him, and merciless when it didn't." Her hand trembled as she lifted her drink. "If he's missing, I wouldn't be surprised. Someone probably saw to it that he stayed that way." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And you would not mourn him?" She looked at him over the rim of her glass. "I've already done my mourning, Mr. Poirot. Years ago, by midnight, the storm had reached its height. Rain lashed against the windows, thunder shook the ship, and the ocean roared like a living beast." Poirot stood in his cabin, the locked chest now before him. The captain had given permission to inspect it, after Poirot's insistence that safety might depend upon it. With a careful hand, he broke the seal. The lock clicked. The lid lifted. Inside were documents, charred, partly destroyed. Letters, legal papers, and a passport blackened at the edges. Among them, a photograph. Lionel Graves standing beside a much younger man, their hands clasped in uneasy friendship. The young man's face was familiar. Poirot had seen him aboard this very ship. He reached for the name written on the back, Oliver Trent. And beneath the photograph lay something else. A watch, its crystal cracked, its hands frozen at 11:47. Poirot stared at it for a long moment. The ship's lights flickered with the storm's fury. Somewhere outside, the waves crashed like drums. He whispered to himself, "So, Monsieur Graves, you are not aboard this ship, but perhaps your ghost sails with us." The thunder rolled, deep and distant. The mystery had begun. Chapter 2, Shadows on the Water. The morning after the storm felt eerily calm. The sea had settled into a gray sheet of glass. The clouds stretched thin and pale, as if exhausted from their fury. The SS Belvoir moved steadily through the quiet, her decks slick from rain, her passengers subdued and whispering. Poirot stood on the observation deck once again, the photograph of Lionel Graves and Oliver Trent resting in his hand. The edges were singed, the faces half faded, yet unmistakable. He had seen deceit before, but there was something in this photograph, some tension, some half-hidden story, that made his mind hum with suspicion. He turned the picture over again. The ink was smudged, but the faint writing was still there. "To our final deal, my friend." A deal, a friendship, and now a missing man. Poirot found Oliver Trent on the lower deck that morning, sketching the remnants of the storm. The writer looked up, his pencil pausing mid-stroke. "You're up early, Mr. Poirot," he said with an easy smile. "Didn't think detectives kept hours." Poirot returned the smile faintly. "The sea does not sleep, monsieur, and neither should one who travels with secrets." Trent raised an eyebrow. "Secrets? I thought this was a pleasure voyage." Poirot held out the photograph. "Then perhaps you can explain this." For a moment, something flickered behind Trent's calm expression. He reached for the photo, studied it, then looked back at Poirot. "Yes, that's Lionel Graves. We met years ago. I was writing a profile on his company. He didn't like what I found, so the article never saw daylight." Poirot folded his hands neatly. "And yet, you travel on his ship." "His ship?" Trent gave a short laugh. "He doesn't own the Belvoir. At least, not officially." Poirot tilted his head. "Unofficially, then?" Trent hesitated. "Let's just say Graves had a way of hiding his money where it couldn't be reached. Perhaps this voyage is where the trail ends." Poirot watched him closely. "You believe he's dead?" Trent's eyes darkened. "I believe he's paying for what he's done. The sea keeps many secrets, Mr. Poirot. Maybe this is one of them." He closed his sketchbook. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an article to finish." Poirot let him go. The young man's steps were calm, but too calm. Controlled, like someone walking a tightrope over something very deep. By midday, the gossip had grown. Mrs. Drummond claimed she'd heard footsteps outside her cabin at midnight. The colonel complained his room had been entered, and one steward swore he saw a man, drenched and shivering, wandering the lower deck in the storm's height, then vanishing when lightning struck. Poirot moved from one whisper to the next, gathering them like breadcrumbs. At the captain's request, he examined the rest of Graves' belongings. The 3 trunks, the burned letters, and a torn envelope bearing only the word Marseille. Inside, nothing but ashes. At lunch, Poirot joined the captain at his private table. The ship hummed softly beneath their feet. The clinking of cutlery filled the silence between them. Captain Whitmore leaned closer. "You think Graves is dead?" Poirot looked out the window, where the horizon cut the sea clean in two. "Dead, yes, but not by accident." "Then who?" Poirot interrupted gently. "Patience, Captain. The truth has a habit of floating to the surface, no matter how deep it's buried." The captain sighed, rubbing his temple. "I'll be honest, detective. There's something wrong aboard. One of my men, crewman Ellis, didn't report for duty this morning. His uniform and ID are missing." Poirot's brow furrowed. "And this Ellis? Is he the same man who found me below deck last night?" "Could be." "Why?" Poirot's voice dropped. "Because he was frightened. And when men like that vanish, it is rarely by choice. That evening, as the sun bled orange over the sea, Poirot walked the promenade deck, reflecting on what he knew so far. A missing man whose belongings burned before departure. A writer who knew too much. A crewman who vanished in the night. And a widow who spoke of curses like she'd lived one. He paused near the railing, eyes on the horizon. The reflection of the ship shimmered on the water below, distorted, trembling, as though the ocean itself was uneasy. Poirot whispered to himself, "The voyage to Marseille may never reach its end." Later that night, the passengers gathered for a charity auction in the ballroom, an event planned long before departure. Laughter echoed once more. The orchestra played, as if trying to banish the ghosts haunting the corridors. Poirot, seated quietly near the back, watched faces instead of items. He saw smiles that didn't reach eyes, glances that lingered too long, fear disguised as civility. When Mrs. Drummond offered a necklace for auction, a glittering string of sapphires, Poirot noticed the colonel watching it like prey. And when the bidding began, Oliver Trent raised his paddle for the first time. The colonel's jaw tightened. Mrs. Drummond's hand trembled. And for a moment, even the music seemed to falter. Poirot leaned forward. "A dance of the living," he murmured, "performed for the dead." After the auction, Poirot returned to his cabin. On his table lay an envelope. No name, no mark, only a single sheet inside. In neat handwriting, it read, "Do not trust the writer. He is not what he claims." Poirot stared at the note for a long time. Then he folded it carefully and slipped it into his pocket. Outside his cabin door, he heard the faintest creak of floorboards. Someone was there, listening. He turned sharply, but the corridor was empty. Only the soft hum of the ship remained. Near midnight, a scream split the silence. Poirot rushed toward the sound. It came from the upper deck, cabin 42. The door was open, the lights swinging violently with the motion of the ship. Inside, Colonel Hartwell stood pale and trembling. At his feet lay a broken glass and a pool of something dark. Poirot moved closer. "What happened?" Hartwell stammered. A figure. I saw someone outside my window. A man, soaked to the bone, staring in at me. I tried to call out, and he vanished." Poirot's eyes flicked to the shattered window. Rain dripped through the cracks. The sea outside churned under the moonlight. No footprints. No sound. Nothing. He turned to the colonel. "You did not imagine it." Hartwell frowned. "You believe me?" Poirot nodded slowly. "Dull. Because I too have seen a ghost on this voyage." He walked to the small desk, examining the wet glass shards. Beneath them lay a single scrap of paper, soaked but legible enough to read 2 words. "Forgive me." Poirot pocketed it. The handwriting was the same as on the anonymous note. Someone aboard was warning him, and confessing all at once. The next morning, the captain called Poirot to the engine room. The noise was deafening, the air hot and metallic. At the far end, 2 crewmen stood pale and silent beside a tarp-covered form. Whitmore spoke quietly. "We found him trapped behind the ventilation grates. Dead for hours. It's Ellis." Poirot knelt, lifting the edge of the tarp. The face beneath was lifeless, the skin pale and wet. But the eyes, frozen open in fear, spoke enough. "Strangled," Poirot said softly, "but not with rope. With cloth. Uniform cloth." He stood. "Someone took his uniform. Someone walks among us as one of your own. Captain." Whitmore swore under his breath. "We'll search every inch of this ship." Poirot shook his head. "No, Captain. The killer will be careful now. Fear makes the clever more dangerous." He looked out through the narrow porthole, where the sun glared over the gray horizon. "We are sailing toward Marseille, yes, but I fear we may not all arrive." That evening, Poirot gathered the key passengers in the reading room: Mrs. Drummond, Colonel Hartwell, and Oliver Trent. The air was thick with tension. The ship's engines throbbed beneath the floor like a pulse. Poirot spoke calmly. Ladies and gentlemen, a man is dead below deck. Another has vanished before we left port. And someone among us wears a mask of innocence. Mrs. Drummond gasped softly. The colonel's fists clenched. Trent sat perfectly still, his gaze unreadable. Poirot continued. Lionel Graves feared for his life, and with reason. He was blackmailed by someone close. Someone who now seeks to erase all evidence of their connection. Trent broke the silence. And you think it's one of us? Poirot's eyes locked with his. I think it is you who must tell me why your photograph was among the ashes of a dead man's chest. The room fell silent. Trent's jaw tightened. Because he deserved to burn. Poirot took a step closer. Then tell me, monsieur, did he burn before the voyage or after? The young man rose, face pale, but eyes defiant. Believe what you wish, detective, but some men earn their end. Graves was one of them. He walked out, leaving only the echo of his steps and the whisper of the sea beyond the glass. Poirot watched him go. Then he said softly, the truth moves like the tide. It always returns. He turned to the captain. Keep watch tonight. I believe before dawn, the sea will give up its second secret. Chapter 3. The Man Who Wasn't There. The sea was black that night, the kind of black that swallowed even the stars, leaving only the sound of waves against steel. The SS Belvoir drifted forward through a fog that had rolled in quietly, thick as breath, wrapping the ship in silence. Hercule Poirot stood on the deck, coat drawn tight, his eyes narrowed on the water below. He had spent the evening tracing connections between the missing Lionel Graves, the murdered crewman Ellis, and the living passengers who now carried the weight of fear on their faces. But one truth refused to leave his mind. Someone aboard the ship was wearing another man's skin. When dawn came, it did so reluctantly. The fog lifted in pale strands, revealing the ship's rails glistening with dew. Poirot walked the corridor to the captain's quarters, each step echoing softly on the wooden floor. Inside, Captain Whitmore was already waiting, a telegram spread open on his desk. It came from the port authorities, Whitmore said grimly. They've confirmed Lionel Graves' car was found abandoned near the docks. Blood on the seat. Enough to suggest he didn't walk away. Poirot's eyes moved to the message. The words were brief, cold. Evidence of death, but no body. And yet, Poirot said slowly, his luggage arrived. His chest, his papers, his photograph. Someone wished us to believe he boarded this ship. Whitmore frowned. You think the killer's on board? Poirot nodded once. The dead man's possessions travel with the living. That is no accident. He paused, his gaze turning distant. A murderer often hides among those pretending to grieve. But on this ship, no one truly grieves. They only fear discovery. Later that morning, Poirot visited Mrs. Drummond in her cabin. She was seated by the window, sunlight glancing off her pearls, though her hands trembled as she poured tea. You look tired, madam, Poirot said softly. She smiled weakly. None of us slept much. The storm, the talk. Poirot sat opposite her. You knew Lionel Graves better than you first admitted. Her eyes flicked up, startled. What makes you say that? Poirot gestured to a photograph on her dressing table. A younger Mrs. Drummond stood beside a man at a gala. Lionel Graves, unmistakably, his hand resting on her shoulder. You were close, Poirot continued. Perhaps more than society approved of. She sighed, lowering her eyes. We were lovers years ago, until I discovered what kind of man he was. He ruined my husband's business, left him penniless. The scandal nearly destroyed me. Poirot leaned forward. And yet, you came aboard his ship, because I wanted to look him in the eye one last time, to see if guilt had touched him. Her voice trembled. I never got the chance. Now he's gone, and I don't know if I'm relieved or haunted. Poirot regarded her for a long moment. Sometimes, madam, the living must answer for the dead. even if the question is not yet asked. By afternoon, the ship had settled into uneasy routine. The passengers walked the decks again, though laughter came forced, brittle. Poirot watched from a distance, noting every movement, every nervous glance. The colonel stood by the railing, staring out to sea as though he might see something rise from it. Poirot approached. A man of discipline cannot bear uncertainty, yes? Hartwell turned sharply. I've seen death, Mr. Poirot, but not like this. A missing man, a dead sailor, a writer with secrets. This isn't war. It's something colder. Poirot nodded. You serve under men who hid behind commands. Here, a man hides behind manners. Hartwell gave a dry laugh. And you think I'm part of it? Poirot shook his head. No, Kenneth, but I think you've seen more than you're willing to admit. The soldier hesitated, then said quietly, last night, after the scream, you remember, I saw someone leaving the upper deck. He wore a crew uniform, but his face was wrong. Too smooth, too pale. I called out, but he vanished into the fog. Poirot's pulse quickened. You're certain? Certain enough that I wish I wasn't. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The uniform, the missing Ellis, the man in disguise. The pieces were moving closer. That evening, as the sky turned to gold and the sea calmed once more, Poirot requested access to the ship's records. In the captain's office, he spread out the passenger list, crew assignments, and manifests. One name stood out, Simon Greaves, a newly hired deckhand, enlisted 2 days before departure. The name was too close, too convenient. Greaves. Graves. Poirot tapped the page thoughtfully. Captain, this man, where is he? Whitmore frowned. He's been working the galley shift. Quiet fellow, keeps to himself. Poirot straightened. Then it is time we introduce ourselves. In the galley, the air was thick with the smell of oil and bread. Poirot stepped carefully between rows of silver pots until he reached the far end. A man stood alone, wiping down a counter. He turned when Poirot spoke. Simon Greaves? The man looked up. His eyes were sharp, calculating. That's me. Something wrong, sir? Poirot regarded him closely. The uniform fit too well. The hands were wrong, clean, not a sailor's hands. The posture, too refined. You are new to the sea, I think, Poirot said mildly. Greaves shrugged. Everyone starts somewhere. Poirot smiled faintly. Indeed. Tell me, have you ever met Lionel Graves? The man's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes flickered. Can't say I have. Poirot leaned closer. Perhaps you have met him in the mirror. Greaves froze. The detective continued, voice calm but cutting. You chose the name carefully. You boarded this ship not as Lionel Graves, but as the man who killed him. For a moment, the hum of the engines was the only sound. Then Greaves laughed softly. You have a wild imagination, Mr. Poirot. Poirot's gaze didn't waver. Imagination, no. Logic, yes. You cannot hide forever. Not from the eyes that see detail. He gestured toward the man's wrist. That burn mark, it matches the description of a scar Lionel Graves had mentioned in his letter. The man who betrayed him bore it. Greaves's smile faded. His voice dropped. You're clever, detective, but cleverness won't save you from the truth. Graves wasn't the victim. He was the disease. He stepped closer. You want to know what's in those burned papers? Proof of everything he did. Fraud, blackmail, even murder. I ended it. I did the world a favor. Poirot's expression softened slightly. And yet, murder dressed as justice is still murder. Greaves's eyes hardened. Then perhaps justice and murder are closer than you think. Before Poirot could reply, the man turned and fled through the service door. By the time the alarm was raised, Greaves had vanished. The captain sealed the decks. Orders shouted across the ship. Passengers were ushered inside as crew searched every corridor. Poirot moved through the fog-thickened air, his mind racing. The killer had nowhere to go, nowhere except down. He reached the cargo hold. The smell of salt and oil was heavy. Somewhere in the shadows, water dripped steadily. Poirot stepped carefully, his eyes adjusting to the dark. "It is over, monsieur," he called. "There is nowhere left to run." A voice echoed back. "You're wrong, detective. There's always the sea." From behind the crates, Greaves emerged, no longer calm, but desperate. In his hand, a revolver gleamed faintly. Poirot raised his hand slightly. "Violence will not cleanse what has been done." Greaves's breath came ragged. "You think you understand? Graves ruined me. I worked for him. He used me to hide his crimes, then left me to take the fall. I wanted him to face justice. He laughed, so I made sure he never laughed again." Poirot's tone was gentle. "So you killed him, took his place, and thought the sea would wash your sins away." Greaves's eyes flickered with something between rage and regret. "I didn't plan to kill Ellis. He found me changing out of the uniform. He threatened to tell the captain." The gun trembled in his hand. "It wasn't supposed to go this far." Poirot took a step closer. "The guilty always say that. But guilt, monsieur, is a tide. It pulls you deeper the more you fight it." Greaves's hand shook. "Stay back." The ship lurched suddenly. A wave struck hard against the hull. The gun slipped from his grasp, clattering to the floor. Poirot seized the moment, stepping forward. He caught the man's arm just as he stumbled toward the open hatch. For a second, they struggled, Poirot's strength against desperation. Then Greaves twisted free, eyes wild. "It's over," he whispered. "For both of us." He threw himself toward the sea. The sound was swallowed instantly. A splash, then silence. The fog closed over the waves like a curtain. Poirot stood alone, staring into the mist. Hours later, the ship resumed its steady pace. The captain confirmed no trace of Greaves was found. The passengers were told it was an accident, but Poirot knew better. In the captain's cabin, he placed the burned photograph on the table. "There's your answer, Captain. 2 men, bound by greed and betrayal. One killed for revenge, the other died for his sins." Whitmore nodded solemnly. "We'll inform the authorities when we reach Marseille." Poirot looked out the window. The fog was lifting. The sea was calm again. But beneath it, somewhere, a man who had stolen another's life now slept among the very lies he tried to escape. He whispered quietly, "Even the sea cannot hide what the conscience remembers." Outside, the passengers began to laugh again. The music returned to the ballroom. The voyage continued as if nothing had happened. But Poirot lingered on deck, staring into the horizon. The voyage had taken a life. But the truth, he thought, was not yet complete. Something still waited, some missing piece left behind. Because when a man vanishes at sea, he leaves behind more than a body. He leaves behind questions. And Hercule Poirot had never been a man to leave questions unanswered. He turned toward the darkening sky. Ahead lay Marseille, and with it the final revelation. Chapter 4, The Last Voyage. The morning they reached Marseille, the sky was silver and still. After nights of storm and death, the sea had gone calm, as if exhausted by its own secrets. Hercule Poirot stood at the bow of the SS Belvoir, the wind combing through his neatly parted hair. Behind him, the passengers were already packing, their voices low, cautious, pretending that everything was normal again. But Poirot knew nothing about this voyage would ever be normal again. Captain Whitmore approached quietly. "The harbor pilots will board within the hour. You've done all you could, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot didn't answer immediately. His gaze lingered on the horizon, blue, endless, deceptive. "Non, mon capitaine," he said softly. "I have done all that is logical, but not all that is true." Whitmore frowned. "Greaves is gone. The case is closed." Poirot turned. "Ah, but that is the problem with cases that close too neatly. They often hide a seam, one that, when tugged, unravels the whole cloth." After breakfast, Poirot visited the ship's cargo hold once more. The air smelled faintly of salt and smoke. The place where Greaves had vanished still bore the scuff of shoes, the dent of struggle. He examined the crates again, carefully, methodically. And there, behind a panel of loose wood, he found it, a small, waterproof pouch. Inside were documents, half-burned, but legible enough for Poirot's sharp eyes. A confession, a letter from Lionel Greaves himself, written before the voyage began. It read, "To whoever finds this, know that I fear for my life. I have been followed by a man I once trusted, a man I ruined in business but spared from prison. He has sworn revenge. If I disappear, he is responsible. But he is not alone in his hatred. There are others aboard this ship who would wish me gone. One of them closer to me than I ever thought possible." Poirot folded the letter carefully. Closer than he thought possible. The phrase echoed in his mind. There was one more name still untouched by suspicion. One passenger who had seemed only a witness to tragedy. Mrs. Drummond. He found her standing alone on the deck, dressed elegantly, the morning light catching on her pearls. Her expression was calm. Too calm for a woman who had nearly sailed with a murderer. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, smiling faintly. "You come to say goodbye?" Poirot bowed slightly. "Goodbyes are easy, madam. What troubles me are unfinished stories." She tilted her head. "You believe there's more?" "I believe," Poirot said softly, "that Lionel Greaves was not entirely the villain you painted him to be. Nor was Greaves merely the avenger. The letter I found speaks of another enemy, one who knew his sins and used them." Mrs. Drummond's hand tightened on the railing. "What are you suggesting?" Poirot stepped closer, his eyes unblinking. "That you knew of the revenge long before this voyage. That you met with Greaves. Perhaps even encouraged him. You wished Greaves dead, but you did not wish to stain your hands. So, you whispered to a man already broken." For a moment, silence ruled the deck. Then she laughed softly, a brittle, elegant sound. "You think too highly of me, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot's tone was gentle but relentless. "Madam, when a heart breaks, it does not lose its sharpness. You loved Greaves once, yes, but love turns to hatred with the same precision as gold turns to dust." Her eyes flashed. "He destroyed my life. My husband took his own life. Because of him, Greaves deserved worse than death." Poirot nodded. "And so you gave it to him through another's hand. You found Greaves, the man he had ruined. You promised him redemption if he did your bidding." She turned away, her voice trembling. "You have no proof." Poirot held up the letter. "Only this. Greaves named his fear. And the timing, madam, it condemns you. You were the one who convinced the captain to delay the ship's departure that night, were you not? To ensure Greaves had time to come aboard." Her breath caught. Poirot's voice softened. "You did not kill Greaves with your own hands, but you lit the fuse that burned his life away." Mrs. Drummond's shoulders sagged. She whispered, "I didn't think it would go that far. I thought he'd frighten him, make him confess." Poirot said quietly, "Madam, when we play with vengeance, we invite the abyss to dine with us." Tears glimmered in her eyes, though her voice remained steady. "And what will you do now? Expose me?" Poirot looked at her for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "No, madame. The sea has taken enough truth for one voyage." He turned away, leaving her trembling in the cold morning light. Later, in his cabin, Poirot sat by the window as Marseille's shoreline appeared, white houses gleaming against the hills. The bells of the harbor could be heard faintly through the mist. The case on paper was complete. Greaves, the murderer. Greaves, the victim. Justice, at least in appearance, was served. And yet Poirot's mind would not rest. He opened his journal and wrote slowly. In every crime, there is the truth that is told and the truth that remains silent. The sea carries both with equal care. He closed the notebook. When the ship finally docked, The passengers disembarked, eager to return to solid ground and leave behind the ghosts of the voyage. Poirot stood at the rail, watching them go, each carrying secrets they would never confess. The captain joined him one last time. "Will you stay in Marseille long, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Perhaps only long enough to forget." Whitmore extended his hand. "For what it's worth, I'm grateful. You gave these people peace." Poirot took the captain's hand. "Peace, yes, but not absolution." As he stepped off the ship, the sunlight fell across his face. For a moment, the reflection of the SS Belvoir shimmered in the water beside him. Grand, silent, indifferent. Poirot paused, his reflection merging with it. "The sea," he murmured, "keeps its secrets well, but even the deepest waters cannot drown the conscience." He turned, coat fluttering in the breeze, and walked into the waiting fog of Marseille. Alone, composed, yet forever haunted by the voyage that began with a lie and ended with silence. Behind him, the ship's horn bellowed, a deep, mournful cry that echoed across the harbor. The SS Belvoir was ready for her next voyage, but Hercule Poirot was not. If you enjoyed unraveling this mystery with Hercule Poirot, don't let the trail end here. Subscribe now for more journeys into the shadows and the secrets that lie just beneath the surface. Until the next case, keep your mind sharp and your heart steady.